1940s, something horrifying began happening in a small Alaskan fishing village. People who had lived there their entire lives, tough, hardened men and women, used to harsh winters and solitude, began vanishing into the trees. Hunters, trappers, lumberjacks, all gone. Days or weeks later, their bodies would sometimes turn up, but never in one piece. Some were crushed, others were torn apart, and some were missing their heads entirely. And the most terrifying part, no one saw what did it. No animal tracks, no suspects, no survivors. So, without warning, the townspeople did something that almost never happens in remote communities like this. They left, not gradually, not after years of decline. They fled all at once. They abandoned their homes, their boats, their belongings, and never went back because something hunted them in the woods around Portlock, Alaska, and whatever it was might still be out there. This video contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Portlock, or Port Chatham, was a remote village on Alaska's Kenai Peninsula. It sat on the edge of the Pacific, ringed by rocky cliffs and dense pine forest. Fog was constant, and the forest always seemed just a little too quiet. It wasn't a place for the faint of heart. Settlers braved harsh winters, isolation, and bears the size of small cars, but they stayed because the land was rich. Salmon swarmed the rivers, timber was plentiful, and the harbor offered shelter from brutal ocean storms. In the early 1900s, a community of fishermen, cannery workers, and loggers took root there, mostly indigenous people, with some Russian and Scandinavian trappers. By the 1920s, Portlock had its own post office, schoolhouse, and a tightly knit population of over 200. But Portlock's beauty came with a cost. Local elders warned their children not to enter the deeper woods alone. They spoke of something watching from the trees, something older than any of them and not entirely human. At the time, those warnings were brushed off as folklore. That would soon change. In the early 1930s, a group of loggers failed to return to camp. They were due back in 2 days. On the third day, nothing. On the fourth, a search party was sent out. The forest was still, too still. Then they found gear, dropped axes, bags, a boot, all strewn along the trail, like the men had run. Next, they found footprints, deep imprints, spaced wide apart, but far too large to be human. Whatever made them walked on 2 legs. The bodies of the men, however, were nowhere to be found. Weeks later, one body washed downriver. His chest was crushed inward, ribs broken, as if something had wrapped around him and squeezed. Locals said it looked like he'd been hit by a train, but there were no trains in Portlock. Some said it was a bear, others weren't so sure, and then it happened again. Over the next 10 years, the disappearances escalated. Trappers went missing, hunters vanished. In some cases, only their tools were found neatly stacked or completely untouched, as if they'd stepped away and never returned. But then came the bodies. One man was found face down in a creek, rifle in hand, head missing. Another was discovered slumped against a tree, his spine broken clean in half. A third had his skull crushed inward, as if stomped by something far stronger than a moose. Word spread fast, but no official reports were filed. These were frontier people. They didn't call for help. They buried the dead and said prayers. But they started talking about something out there that wasn't an animal and wasn't a man. Some even gave it a name. The natives called it Nantinak, a being from ancient legend, described as a massive upright creature covered in hair, with glowing eyes and the stench like death. It wasn't just seen, it was felt. Fishermen spoke of heavy breathing near their camps. Trappers heard 2-legged footsteps following them just beyond the firelight, and hunters reported rocks being thrown from high above, far too accurately for any animal. It moved like a shadow, fast, deliberately, and it hated being seen. Some believed it wasn't one creature, but a group of them, territorial, violent, and ancient. Whatever the truth, the sightings always ended the same way, in fear, and sometimes in death. the early 1940s, the town of Portlock was gripped by something worse than isolation: dread. Logging crews refused to enter certain parts of the forest. Fishing boats stopped going out before sunrise. Families began sleeping in shifts, keeping watch. As disappearances became more frequent, so did the sightings. Just beyond the tree lines of the town, people reported seeing tall shadows peeking from behind trees. Even the postmaster noted unusual mail urgent letters with phrases like, "We have to leave," and "It's watching again." One night, a man disappeared from his cabin door, still locked from the inside. In another case, a hunter was found miles from camp, legs broken, crawling toward the village with his fingernails torn off. He died before he could speak. It became too much. This wasn't just superstition anymore. It was survival. The final straw came in 1949. The Portlock cannery, the town's only real economic engine, shut down. Not from bankruptcy, not from fish shortages, but because the workers refused to stay. The last few employees described distant howls and something or someone moving between the trees. Rocks being thrown but could never see what was throwing them. 2 workers claimed they saw a pair of red eyes blinking from the cliffs above. One man, a security guard, wrote in his journal, "The trees aren't empty. I feel it watching. If I don't come back, it's because I followed the noise." He never came back. By the time the cannery padlocked its gates, half the town had already left. In 1950, Portlock was empty. Boats were tied up at the dock, gathering algae. Homes were left unlocked, dinner plates still on tables. The post office was shut. The schoolhouse sat silent. No ceremony, no explanation, just silence. Entire families vanished into other parts of Alaska without leaving forwarding addresses. Some refused to talk about why. Others, when pressed, simply said, "We weren't alone out there." Unlike other ghost towns that died of poverty, Portlock was different. It wasn't abandoned, it was evacuated. Here's where it gets weirder. There are no official federal reports about what happened in Portlock. No investigations, no missing person bulletins, no public safety bulletins. Alaska wasn't even a state yet. It was a vast, wild territory. The authorities were stretched thin. In the years after, pilots avoided flying too close to Portlock. Radio chatter among bush planes mentioned strange turbulence near the cliffs. Hunters who entered the valley didn't always come back, and those who did refused to talk. In 1968, a goat hunter ventured into the hills above Portlock alone. He was experienced, armed, but when he returned, he was pale and shaken. He told friends that something had stalked him for miles, something large, silent, and fast. At one point it chased him downhill. He never saw its face, but he said he could hear it breathing behind him. He never hunted there again. Then, in 1973, a group of hunters took shelter during a storm near the old town site. That night, as the wind howled, they heard footsteps circling their tent. Not running, not stomping, just slow, deliberate pacing. One man unzipped the tent flap and looked out. There was something standing just beyond the tree line. Tall, motionless, watching. The next morning, they packed up without saying a word, and none of them ever spoke publicly about what they saw. In the early 2000s, Cryptid researchers and survival teams began returning to the site. Some brought night vision gear, others brought weapons, one brought dogs. None stayed longer than 48 hours. Why? Because whatever was out there didn't want them there. One team reported hearing something mimic their own voices. Another found claw marks 10 feet up a cedar tree far too high for any bear. One claimed their trail camera was torn off and buried under rocks overnight. The most chilling discovery came in 2015 when a hiker found a human tooth, cracked, old, lying on a rock in the center of a perfect circle of stacked stones. There were no footprints around it. In 2019, a kayaker passing the coast near the old cannery looked up and saw a figure, tall, motionless, standing at the tree line above the cliffs. He thought it was a statue until it moved. When he turned his boat and looked again, It was gone, but he swore it had no face, just a black void where the features should have been. He never returned to that bay again. These weren't stories from a century ago. They happened long after the town was gone, and whatever it was still there. Today, Portlock is rotting quietly. The buildings are falling in. Moss covers the cabins. Nature is reclaiming what fear left behind. But the forest hasn't been forgotten. Local hunters still won't go near it. Native elders still refuse to speak its name. And visitors who camp too close often report the same things. Snapping branches, distant breathing, the sense that something huge is just out of sight, watching them, and always silent. The kind of silence that listens. Portlock wasn't abandoned because it ran out of fish or because the land went barren. Quite the opposite. The area around Portlock is still rich with resources. Untouched forests, thriving salmon runs, and one of the most naturally protected harbors on Alaska's southern coast. Loggers, fishermen, even developers have all looked at it on paper and said, this should have become something big. But it has never been repopulated because something else lives there. Something that watches from the cliffs and walks between the trees. Entire families left Portlock behind in the 1950s and never looked back, but the forest didn't forget them. And no one, not even the boldest explorers, has dared to settle there since. It's as if the land itself doesn't want to be reclaimed. Or maybe it already belongs to something else. So if you ever find yourself on the coast of the old village, don't stop. And whatever you do, don't step ashore. So what happened in Portlock, Alaska? Was it folklore gone too far? Or was it something real that made an entire town vanish overnight? Some say the land still remembers, and whatever walked through those woods never left. Let me know in the comments below if you like this story and want more real-life disappearances, abandoned towns, and dark, unsolved mysteries. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story might just be the one you've never heard of but can't forget.